The sun cast long shadows over the cemetery as Lucille Bryson knelt in the freshly turned dirt, tears streaming down her face, the pain of loss still raw and biting like the West Texas winds. Her father's weathered gravestone simple, like the man himself, bore only his name, dates, and the words "beloved father," but to Lucille, it felt like the weight of the entire world rested upon that slab of granite. "Why'd you have to leave me alone, Pa?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she traced her fingers over the engraved letters. The year was 1876, and Brownsville, Texas had never felt more desolate and unwelcoming than it did now, with her only family 6 feet below the earth she knelt upon. Lucille didn't hear the approaching footsteps, didn't notice the tall shadow that fell across her father's grave until a deep voice, gentle yet firm, broke through her grief. "He'd want you to keep living, miss." Startled, she looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see a man she didn't recognize. He stood tall against the setting sun, his silhouette outlined by golden light, the wide brim of his cowboy hat casting his face in shadow. He wasn't from Brownsville, she would have known him if he were, but there was something in his stance that spoke of both strength and compassion. "What would you know about what my father would want?" she challenged, hastily wiping away her tears with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. The stranger took off his hat, revealing sun-bronzed skin, intelligent hazel eyes, and a face that had clearly weathered its fair share of hardship. "I know loss, miss. I know that those who truly love us don't want us spending our days crying at their graves." Something in his words cut through the fog of her grief, making her both angry and curious. She stood, brushing the dirt from her black mourning dress. "And who might you be to offer such wisdom to strangers?" "Quentin O'Malley," he answered, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. "Just passing through on my way north." Lucille straightened her shoulders, trying to recover her dignity. "Well, Mr. O'Malley, I thank you for your concern, but my grief is my own business." His eyes softened. "Of course it is. I apologize for intruding." He replaced his hat and turned to leave, but then paused. "I lost my father too, you know, 3 years ago. Some days I still expect to see him walk through the door." He looked back at her with an expression that spoke of shared pain. "It doesn't go away, but it does change. And one day you'll find that the memories bring more smiles than tears." With that, he tipped his hat respectfully and walked away, leaving Lucille standing beside her father's grave, watching his retreating form with a strange mixture of irritation and intrigue. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, the Texas heat already building as Lucille opened her father's general store. It had been his pride and joy for 20 years, and now it was hers, a responsibility she hadn't asked for and wasn't sure she could handle. Every corner of the store held memories of him, from the tobacco pipes he'd stocked because they reminded him of his own father, to the candy jars he'd kept filled because he couldn't resist seeing children smile. Lucille moved mechanically through her morning routine, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting, rearranging items that were already perfectly arranged. The familiar tasks brought little comfort today. Her mind kept wandering back to the stranger at the cemetery, to his presumptuous words and the understanding in his eyes. The bell above the door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned, a practiced shopkeeper's smile already forming on her lips, only to freeze when she saw who had entered. "Mr. O'Malley," she said, her voice carefully neutral. He looked different in the daylight, less mysterious, more human. His clothes were travel-worn but clean, his manner respectful as he removed his hat. "Miss Bryson," he replied with a nod. "I hope I'm not intruding again." She raised an eyebrow. "You know my name." "Small towns have big voices," he said with a slight smile. "I asked about the store and your name came attached to it. Your father was well respected here." Lucille felt the familiar ache in her chest at the mention of her father. "Yes, he was." Quentin looked around the store with appreciation. "Fine establishment. You run it alone now." "I do," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. O'Malley? We have supplies for travelers if you're continuing north." He approached the counter, his steps unhurried. "Actually, I'm looking for work. I heard in town that your father employed a stockman who moved on last month. I thought perhaps you might be in need of help." Lucille studied him carefully. It was true Samuel had left for California after her father fell ill, and she'd been struggling to manage deliveries and inventory alone. But to hire this stranger, this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable. "Why would you want to work here? You said you were passing through." Quentin met her gaze steadily. "Plans change. And I'm good with my hands, know my way around a ledger, and can lift things you probably shouldn't be lifting alone. And how do I know you're not some drifter who'll steal my stock and disappear in the night?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You don't. But I can provide references from my previous employer in Houston, and I suspect you're a good judge of character, Miss Bryson." Lucille hesitated. She did need help desperately, in fact, but trusting this man felt like a leap of faith she wasn't prepared to make. "I'll pay for room and board at the hotel until you decide," he added, seeming to sense her reluctance. "And if you find my work unsatisfactory, you can dismiss me without a second thought." The practical side of Lucille knew this was the solution to at least one of her problems. She couldn't keep working from dawn till dusk, handling every aspect of the store herself. And there was something about Quentin O'Malley that, despite her better judgment, she found herself wanting to trust. "1 week," she finally said. "I'll give you 1 week to prove yourself useful. You can start by unloading the supply wagon that's arriving this afternoon." His face broke into a genuine smile. "You won't regret it, Miss Bryson." But as he walked toward the back of the store to familiarize himself with the layout, Lucille already wondered if she would. The supply wagon arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, as it had every second Thursday for as long as Lucille could remember. Charlie Winters, the driver, tipped his hat to her as she emerged from the store. "Afternoon, Miss Lucille. Sorry about your pa. He was a good man." "Thank you, Charlie," she replied, the words feeling hollow after repeating them so many times in recent weeks. Charlie glanced at Quentin, who had appeared beside her. "This your new help? Mr. O'Malley is assisting on a trial basis," Lucille explained, her tone professional. Quentin stepped forward, extending his hand to Charlie. "Pleased to meet you. Where would you like me to start?" Charlie seemed to approve of the firm handshake. "Those flour sacks need to go in first, then the sugar barrels. Miss Lucille can show you where everything goes." For the next hour, Lucille watched as Quentin efficiently unloaded the wagon, carrying heavy items with ease and organizing them exactly as she directed. He worked without complaint in the sweltering heat, his shirt soon damp with sweat, his movements quick but careful. "You've done this before," she observed as he stacked the last of the canned goods on a shelf. "I've done most things before," he replied, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "My life hasn't exactly followed a straight path." Lucille found herself curious despite her determination to keep their relationship strictly professional. "And what path brought you to Brownsville?" He paused, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "The path of someone looking for a new beginning, I suppose. Running from something." She asked, instantly regretting the bluntness of her question. Quentin's expression remained neutral. "We're all running from something, Miss Bryson, or toward something, sometimes both at once." Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled, announcing a customer. Lucille turned to greet Mrs. Patterson, one of the town's most prominent gossips, whose eyes widened with interest at the sight of Quentin. "Well, well," Mrs. Patterson said, her gaze moving between Lucille and Quentin. "I see you've found someone to help around the store." "Yes," Lucille answered, acutely aware of how this would appear to the woman whose favorite pastime was spreading stories. "Mr. O'Malley is my new stockman. Mr. O'Malley, this is Mrs. Patterson." Quentin nodded politely. "Madam, Mrs." Patterson smiled, her eyes twinkling with unspoken speculation. "How fortunate for you, Lucille dear. A young woman shouldn't have to manage such responsibilities alone. Your father would be pleased." Lucille felt her cheeks warm. Was there something specific you needed today, Mrs. Patterson? Oh yes, some sugar and that special tea you order from back east, and perhaps some news about your handsome new employee. The sugar and tea I can provide, Lucille said firmly. The news, I'm afraid, is rather scarce. Mr. O'Malley only started today, as she gathered Mrs. Patterson's items. Lucille was aware of Quentin discreetly returning to his work in the stockroom, giving her space to deal with the nosy customer. She appreciated his tact, even as she braced herself for the inevitable wave of gossip that would now spread through Brownsville, after Mrs. Patterson left, promising to return soon to see how things were progressing. Lucille found Quentin organizing a shipment of nails into their proper bins. I should warn you, she said, by supper time, half the town will be speculating about your presence here. He looked up with a wry smile. Small towns, some things never change no matter where you go. Does that bother you? Not particularly. Does it bother you? Lucille considered the question. I suppose I've lived here long enough to expect it. But I would appreciate if you didn't give them anything substantial to gossip about. Quentin's expression grew serious. I'm here to work, Miss Bryson, nothing more. Yet as he said it, something in his eyes, a fleeting warmth, perhaps made Lucille wonder if that was entirely true. And more disturbingly, she wasn't certain how she felt about that possibility. As the week progressed, Quentin proved himself not only capable but invaluable. He rose early each morning, arriving at the store before Lucille to sweep the porch and sidewalk. He learned the inventory system quickly, suggesting improvements that Lucille reluctantly admitted were sensible. He handled difficult customers with a calm patience she sometimes lacked, and stayed late without complaint when work demanded it. By the fifth day, Lucille found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. The way his hands moved with surprising gentleness as he arranged delicate items, the quiet concentration in his eyes as he reviewed the ledger, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when he was genuinely amused. On the afternoon of the seventh day, the last of their agreed trial period, Quentin approached her as she was closing the books for the day. I believe my week is up, Miss Bryson, he said, standing respectfully on the other side of the counter. Lucille looked up, suddenly realizing she'd been dreading this conversation. Yes, it is. Have I proven myself useful? His tone was light, but she detected a hint of genuine concern beneath it. You have, she admitted. More than I expected, if I'm being honest. Relief flickered across his face. Then might I hope for continued employment? Lucille closed the ledger, gathering her thoughts. Before I decide, Mr. O'Malley, I find myself curious about something. You've proven yourself capable of far more than stocking shelves and making deliveries. What brings a man with your abilities to seek work in a small general store in Brownsville? Quentin's expression sobered. Would you believe me if I said it was fate that brought me to that cemetery last week? I'm not sure I believe in fate, Mr. O'Malley. Then call it coincidence or chance. I wasn't planning to stop in Brownsville for more than a night, but then I saw you at your father's grave and something. He paused, searching for words. Something told me I needed to stay. The sincerity in his voice made Lucille uncomfortable, not because she doubted him, but because she believed him. And believing him meant acknowledging a connection between them that extended beyond employer and employee. The position is yours if you want it, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. But I should warn you, it doesn't pay much. The pay is fair, he assured her, and the company is better than I've had in a long while. Their eyes met for a moment too long, and Lucille felt a flush creeping up her neck. She quickly looked away, busying herself with rearranging items on the counter. Well, then, you can continue to stay at the hotel, or there's a room above the store that my father kept for occasional use. It's small, but the room above would be perfect, Quentin said. If you're comfortable with that arrangement, Lucille nodded, still not meeting his eyes. It's settled then. I'll show you the room after we close. Later, as she led him up the narrow staircase to the small apartment above the store, Lucille was acutely aware of his presence behind her. The space had been her father's retreat, a place to rest during long days, or to stay when winter weather made the journey home difficult. It was simple: one room with a bed, a washstand, a small table with a chair, and a window overlooking the main street. "It's not much," she said as Quentin looked around, "but it's clean and private." "It's perfect," he assured her. "Thank you, Miss Bryson." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call you Lucille? Miss Bryson seems overly formal for people who work together every day." Lucille hesitated. Such familiarity wasn't proper, especially given their living arrangement. But then, propriety seemed a trivial concern after all she'd been through. "You may," she conceded, "but only when we're not in front of customers." "Of course," he agreed. "And I'm Quentin to you whenever you're ready to use it." As she descended the stairs, Lucille was troubled by the warmth that spread through her at the thought of saying his name aloud. It was foolish to feel this way about an employee, a man she barely knew, whose past remained largely a mystery. Yet she couldn't deny the growing spark of interest, of connection, that flared whenever he was near. That night, lying in her bed in the small house she'd shared with her father, Lucille found herself wondering what Quentin was doing in the room above the store. Was he thinking of her as she was thinking of him? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. It had been only 3 weeks since her father's death. Was it disloyal to feel even the smallest stirring of attraction to another person? "He'd want you to keep living," Quentin had said at the grave. For the first time, Lucille considered that he might be right. The seasons in Texas changed subtly. But by the time October arrived, the oppressive summer heat had given way to more merciful temperatures. 3 months had passed since Quentin had appeared in the cemetery, and life at Bryson's general store had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Quentin had proven himself indispensable, not just for his strong back and quick mind, but for the way he complemented Lucille's own strengths and weaknesses. Where she was meticulous with numbers and correspondence, he excelled at negotiating with suppliers and handling difficult customers. Where he sometimes missed small details in inventory, she caught them with her careful eye. They worked well together, moving around each other with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity, occasionally exchanging glances that lingered a moment too long. Their conversations, once strictly business, had gradually expanded to include personal topics, books they'd read, places they'd seen, childhood memories that made them laugh. Lucille found herself looking forward to the quiet evenings after closing, when they would sit at the counter and review the day's business, their discussion often drifting to more personal matters as the night deepened. On one such evening in early October, as a rare autumn rain pattered against the windows, Quentin mentioned his father for the second time since they'd met. "He was a wanderer at heart," he said, a faraway look in his eyes. "Never could stay in one place too long. Drove my mother to distraction, but she loved him too much to hold him back." "Is that where you get it from?" Lucille asked. "The wandering?" He considered her question. "Maybe, though I've been thinking lately that there might be something to be said for putting down roots." The way he looked at her as he said it made Lucille's heart skip a beat. She quickly changed the subject. "You never did tell me what brought you to Texas in the first place." Quentin's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Opportunity, mostly. After the war, there wasn't much left for me back east." Lucille had suspected he'd fought in the war. There was a certain recognizable quality to men who had seen battle, but he'd never mentioned it directly before. "You served in the Union Army?" She asked carefully, aware that such topics could still be sensitive even 11 years after the war's end. "I did," he confirmed. 4 years that aged me 20. "My father supported the Union cause," she said softly, "though he never fought. It wasn't a popular position around here." Quentin nodded, understanding the implications. And yet people respected him anyway. He earned their respect through fairness and kindness. He never treated anyone differently based on their beliefs or background. She smiled sadly. "He used to say that commerce was the great equalizer. Everyone needs flour and sugar, regardless of politics." Wise man, your father. He was, Lucille agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss, though it had softened somewhat with time. I still miss him every day. Quentin hesitated, then gently covered her hand with his own. That's as it should be. We carry the people we love with us, even after they're gone. The warmth of his hand on her sent a flutter through Lucille's stomach. She knew she should withdraw, maintain the proper distance between them, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Quentin, she said, using his first name aloud for the first time. Why did you really stay in Brownsville? His eyes, always expressive, softened as they held hers. I think you know the answer to that, Lucille. The sound of her name on his lips made her breath catch. They were treading dangerous ground now, crossing a line that, once crossed, could not easily be redrawn. The moment was broken by a sudden pounding on the store's front door. They jumped apart, Lucille pulling her hand back as if burned. Who could that be at this hour? She wondered, moving toward the door. Quentin was faster, placing himself between her and the entrance. Let me. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the rain-streaked glass before relaxing slightly. It's Billy Taylor, he said, recognizing the teenage son of one of their regular customers. Quentin unlocked the door, opening it to reveal a soaking wet boy of about 16, his face pale with urgency. Mr. O'Malley, Miss Bryson, you gotta come quick. Pa's had an accident at the mill, and Ma sent me to fetch Dr. Lewis, but he's away delivering Mrs. Henderson's baby, and she said to ask if you might have any medicinals that could help with the pain till he gets back. Lucille immediately went into action, gathering the store's modest medical supplies. What happened, Billy? Machinery caught his arm. It's awful bad, Miss Bryson. Quentin grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. I know something about field medicine from the war. I'll come with you. Lucille hesitated only briefly before collecting her own coat. I'm coming too. Together they hurried through the rainy streets, following Billy to the Taylor home near the lumber mill. Inside, they found Thomas Taylor lying on the kitchen table, his face gray with pain, his wife Martha pressing a blood-soaked cloth to his mangled arm. Thank the Lord, Martha breathed when she saw them. The bleeding won't stop. Quentin moved forward with a confidence that surprised Lucille. He examined the wound carefully, his expression grave but controlled. The brachial artery is torn, he said. He needs the doctor, but first we need to stop this bleeding or he won't last long enough to see him. For the next hour, Lucille watched as Quentin worked to save Thomas Taylor's life and arm. His hands moved with practiced skill as he fashioned a tourniquet, cleaned the wound, and applied pressure to the right points. He spoke calmly throughout, giving clear instructions to Lucille and Martha, reassuring Thomas with a steady voice. When Dr. Lewis finally arrived, exhausted from delivering the Henderson baby but ready to take over, he raised his eyebrows at the sight of Quentin's work. Military medicine, he asked as he examined the bandaging. Yes, sir, Quentin confirmed. Second Bull Run, Gettysburg, the Wilderness, Doctor. Lewis nodded with respect. You may have saved his arm, son, and certainly his life. As they walked back to the store in the pre-dawn light, the rain having finally stopped, Lucille looked at Quentin with new eyes. You never mentioned you had medical training. He shrugged, seeming uncomfortable with her admiration. Not training, exactly. Experience. You learn quickly in field hospitals or men die. You're full of surprises, Mr. O'Malley, she said, deliberately using his formal name to lighten the moment. He smiled faintly. I hope they're mostly good ones. So far, she admitted, then added more seriously, what you did tonight was remarkable. Anyone would have helped. Not anyone could have helped the way you did. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Thank you. In the pale morning light, with his hair damp from rain and his clothes stained with Thomas Taylor's blood, Quentin looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. Lucille, he said softly, about what was happening before Billy arrived, we should get back, she interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say, of what she might do if he said it. The store needs to open in a few hours. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. Of course. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but something had shifted between them, a boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged, even if neither was ready to speak it aloud. News of Quentin's actions spread quickly through Brownsville. By the end of the week, the entire town knew how the newcomer had saved Thomas Taylor's arm and possibly his life. People who had regarded him with suspicion now nodded respectfully when he passed. Customers lingered to chat with him, no longer just tolerating his presence but actively seeking his advice and company. For Lucille, the change in the town's attitude toward Quentin brought both relief and a new kind of anxiety. She was glad to see him accepted, to know that others recognized his worth as she did. But his growing popularity also meant more eyes on them, more speculation about their relationship, more pressure to define what was happening between them. And something was happening, something neither of them could deny any longer, though they'd carefully avoided addressing it directly since that rainy night. It was Mrs. Patterson who finally forced the issue in her typically unsubtle way. "The harvest dance is next Saturday," she announced one afternoon as Lucille wrapped her purchases. "I do hope you'll be attending, dear. It would do you good to socialize a bit. You've been in mourning long enough." Lucille tied the package with string, buying time. "I haven't given it much thought, Mrs. Patterson." "Well, you should." The older woman leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "And perhaps Mr. O'Malley might escort you. Such a handsome, capable man and a hero now after what he did for poor Thomas. Half the unmarried women in town have their eyes on him, you know." The thought of other women pursuing Quentin sent an unexpected surge of jealousy through Lucille. She forced a smile. "Mr. O'Malley is free to escort whomever he chooses, of course." Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "Don't wait too long to make your interests known, dear. Men like that don't stay unattached forever." After the woman left, Lucille found herself distracted, Mrs. Patterson's words echoing in her mind. Was she right? Were other women pursuing Quentin? He'd never mentioned any social engagements, but then they didn't discuss such personal matters. Later that afternoon, when they were alone in the store during a quiet period, Quentin seemed to sense her preoccupation. "Something troubling you?" he asked as she rearranged a display of canned goods for the third time. Lucille hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Are you planning to attend the harvest dance?" If he was surprised by the question, he didn't show it. "I hadn't thought about it. Are you, Mrs. Patterson seems to think I should." "And what do you think?" Lucille finally met his gaze. "I think I'd like to go, but only with the right company." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Are you asking me to escort you, Lucille Bryson?" The formality of his tone was belied by the warmth in his expression. Lucille felt her cheeks flush. "I suppose I am, Quentin O'Malley," he smiled, a genuine, unreserved smile that transformed his entire face. "Then I accept on one condition." "What condition?" "That we call it what it is, a courtship, not just an escort to a dance." The word hung in the air between them, bold and undeniable. Courtship. An official acknowledgement of intentions, of feelings that had been growing for months. Lucille's heart raced. "People will talk." "People already talk," he pointed out. "But if you're not ready, I am," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I'm ready." The week leading up to the harvest dance passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Lucille found herself caring about her appearance in a way she hadn't since before her father's illness. She ordered a new dress from the seamstress, a deep blue that complemented her eyes and was far more festive than anything she'd worn in months. Quentin, too, made efforts for the occasion. He purchased a new shirt and waistcoat, and Lucille noticed he'd visited the barber for a trim of his usually shaggy hair. The night of the dance, when he came downstairs from his room dressed in his finest clothes, clean-shaven and slightly nervous, she felt her breath catch at the sight of him. "You look beautiful," he said simply when he saw her in her new dress. "So do you," she replied, then laughed at her mistake. "Handsome, I mean." He offered his arm with a smile. "Shall we face the gossips together, Miss Bryson?" Their entrance to the town hall, which had been decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty for the occasion, caused exactly the stir Lucille had expected. Conversations paused, heads turned, and whispers immediately began to circulate. But for once, Lucille found she didn't care. The warm pressure of Quentin's hand at her waist as he led her to the dance floor was all she could focus on. "Everyone's staring," she murmured as they took their positions for the first dance. "Let them," Quentin replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I only care about one person's opinion tonight." As the music began and they moved together in the patterns of the dance, Lucille felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The sorrow that had weighed her down since her father's death didn't disappear. She knew it never would completely, but it receded, making room for joy to coexist alongside it. Later, as they stepped outside for some air, Quentin led her to a quiet corner of the porch, away from other couples seeking respite from the warm, crowded hall. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "More than I thought possible," she admitted. "Thank you for convincing me to come." "I believe you were the one who did the convincing," he reminded her with a smile. Lucille laughed. "Perhaps we convinced each other." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the music drifting from inside, the cool night air a pleasant contrast to the heat of the dance floor. "Lucille," Quentin said finally, turning to face her fully, "there's something I need to tell you." Something I should have said before we made this courtship official. A flutter of anxiety passed through her. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "You know I fought in the war and that I came to Texas afterward. What I haven't told you is why I left my home in Pennsylvania." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "After Gettysburg, I was sent home to recover from wounds. While there, I became engaged to a young woman I'd known since childhood." Lucille felt her heart sink. "You're married?" "No," he quickly assured her. "No, but," he sighed. "When I returned to the front, she promised to wait for me. But by the time the war ended, she had married a man who'd never left home. A man whose hands weren't stained with blood, whose nights weren't haunted by the things mine were." Understanding dawned. "So you came west." "I wandered," he corrected. "For years, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere long until Brownsville." "Until me," Lucille said softly. His eyes met hers, vulnerable and honest. "Until you. I need you to know that I'm not running anymore, Lucille. Whatever this is between us, and I believe it's something rare and precious, it's not a temporary stop on a journey elsewhere." Lucille reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "I believe you, Quentin, and I think," she paused, gathering her courage, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air like delicate crystals, beautiful and fragile. Quentin's eyes widened, and for a moment Lucille feared she'd been too forward, had risked too much. Then he smiled, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes and transformed his entire face. "I don't think I'm falling in love with you, Lucille Bryson," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I am." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Lucille moved toward him, closing the distance until their lips met in a kiss that was gentle yet full of promise. When they parted, Lucille saw in Quentin's eyes the same wonder she felt, the surprise of finding something precious when neither had been looking for it. "We should go back inside," she said after a moment, "before we're missed." He nodded, offering his arm once more. "Dance with me again." "As many times as you'd like," she replied, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. As they returned to the warmth and light of the harvest dance, Lucille thought of her father. Would he approve of Quentin? Of this rapid shift from grief to joy? She believed he would. He had always wanted her happiness above all else. "He'd want you to keep living," Quentin had said that day at the cemetery. Now, with her hand in his and her heart lighter than it had been in months, Lucille finally understood what he'd meant. Living wasn't just about surviving day to day. It was about embracing joy when it appeared, about opening your heart to new possibilities even in the midst of sorrow. And that, she was certain, was exactly what her father would have wanted for her. The weeks following the harvest dance brought a change in the rhythm of life at Bryson's general store. The courtship between Lucille and Quentin became public knowledge, discussed over dinner tables and church pews throughout Brownsville. Most reactions were positive. The townspeople had grown to respect Quentin for his work ethic and his heroism with Thomas Taylor, and many had worried about Lucille being alone after her father's death. A few voices of concern were raised, those who thought the courtship had begun too soon after Matthew Bryson's passing, or who wondered about Quentin's mysterious past before arriving in Brownsville. But Lucille found such criticisms easier to bear than she might have imagined. Happiness, she discovered, was a powerful shield against the arrows of gossip. As November progressed and the air grew cooler, Quentin and Lucille settled into the comfortable rhythms of courtship. They still worked side by side in the store during the day, maintaining professional decorum in front of customers. But evenings were now devoted to each other, walks along the river as the sun set, quiet suppers in Lucille's home, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Lucille learned that Quentin had grown up on a small farm outside Harrisburg, the son of a schoolteacher mother and a carpenter father. He'd studied at a small college before the war interrupted his education and had dreams of perhaps finishing someday. He spoke 3 languages: English, French, and enough Spanish to get by, and could name the constellations that wheeled overhead on clear Texas nights. In turn, she shared stories of her own childhood in Brownsville, of a mother who died when Lucille was 12, of learning the store business at her father's side, of dreams she'd once had of traveling to Europe before responsibility had anchored her firmly to this plot of Texas soil. "Do you regret staying?" Quentin asked one evening as they sat on the porch of her small house, watching the stars emerge. Lucille considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I wonder what my life might have been if I'd made different choices, but no, I don't regret it. My father needed me and I needed to be needed." She smiled at him in the gathering darkness. "And if I'd gone elsewhere, I wouldn't be here now with you." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about the future, Lucille." Her heart quickened. "Have you?" "I have a small savings from my years of wandering. Not much, but enough perhaps to build something of my own, or to invest in something already built." "The store," she said, understanding his meaning, "if you were amenable, not as an employee but as a partner, in business and—" He hesitated, then continued more softly, "In life, perhaps. When you're ready." Though they'd spoken of love, neither had yet mentioned marriage directly. The word hung unspoken between them now, full of possibility. "I think," Lucille said carefully, "that I might be ready sooner than either of us expected." Quentin's smile was visible even in the dim light of dusk. "Is that so, Miss Bryson?" "It is, Mr. O'Malley." She leaned toward him, her earlier shyness replaced by a growing confidence in what they were building together. "But I believe a proper proposal traditionally involves a certain posture." He laughed, the sound warm in the cool evening air. "Are you instructing me on how to propose to you?" "Merely offering guidance," she replied with a teasing smile. "For when the time comes, I'll keep that in mind." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "For when the time comes." The time came sooner than either anticipated, hastened by an unexpected event. In early December, as Brownsville prepared for Christmas, a stranger arrived at the general store just before closing. He was a tall man, well-dressed but travel-worn, with a bearing that immediately put Quentin on alert. "Can I help you, sir?" Quentin asked, moving slightly in front of Lucille in what she recognized as a protective gesture. The man's gaze flickered between them before settling on Quentin. "I'm looking for Quentin O'Malley. I was told in town I might find him here." "You found him," Quentin replied, his voice neutral but tense. "And you are James Harrington," the man said, extending his hand. "I represent the law firm of Donnelly & Sons in Philadelphia. I've been searching for you for nearly 3 months, Mr. O'Malley." Lucille felt Quentin stiffen beside her, though his expression remained carefully composed. What business would a Philadelphia law firm have with me? Harrington reached into his coat, producing an envelope. Your uncle, Edmund O'Malley, passed away in September. As his only living relative, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate. Quentin accepted the envelope with visible surprise. Uncle Edmund, I haven't seen him since before the war. Nevertheless, he remembered you in his will. The details are all there. Harrington nodded toward the envelope. It's a substantial inheritance, Mr. O'Malley. You'll need to come to Philadelphia to sign the necessary papers and take possession of the property. Lucille's heart sank at these words. Philadelphia. Thousands of miles away from Brownsville. From her, Quentin seemed to sense her distress. Mr. Harrington, may I introduce Miss Lucille Bryson, owner of this establishment, and— He glanced at her, his eyes soft. The woman I intend to marry. The declaration, made so matter-of-factly to a stranger, took Lucille's breath away. Harrington, for his part, merely nodded politely. A pleasure, Miss Bryson. I apologize for the intrusion at this late hour. I'm staying at the hotel and will be in town for 2 days before continuing my journey. Perhaps, Mr. O'Malley, we could meet tomorrow to discuss the details further? Of course, Quentin agreed. Come by the store in the morning. After Harrington left, silence fell between them. Lucille moved to lock the door, her mind racing with implications. Lucille, Quentin began, but she interrupted him. Did you mean it? What you said about intending to marry me? His expression softened. Every word. Though I had planned a more romantic setting for that particular conversation. Despite her anxiety about what the inheritance might mean for their future, Lucille couldn't help but smile. I don't need romance, Quentin. I just need honesty. Then honestly, Lucille Bryson, I love you and want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? The simplicity of it, no grand speeches, no theatrical gestures, just the pure, unvarnished truth of his feelings moved her deeply. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms and kissing her with an intensity that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, she asked the question weighing on her mind. What about Philadelphia? Your inheritance? Quentin sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what Uncle Edmund left me, but whatever it is, it doesn't change my feelings or my plans. If I need to go to Philadelphia to sign papers, I'll go and return as quickly as possible. And if it's something substantial, property that needs managing, he studied her face. What are you really asking, Lucille? She took a deep breath. I'm asking if this changes things between us, if you'll want to leave Brownsville now that you have options elsewhere. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You think I might ask you to leave your home, your store, everything you've built here? Or that you might choose to leave without me, she admitted, voicing her deeper fear. Quentin took her hands in his. Lucille, listen to me. I've spent years wandering, never finding a place that felt like home until I walked into that cemetery and saw you. Whatever my uncle has left me, it's just property, just money. What I have here, what we're building together, that's what matters. But nothing, he insisted. If there are decisions to be made about this inheritance, we'll make them together as partners. I promise you that. The certainty in his voice reassured her. Together, she repeated, liking the sound of it. Together, he confirmed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The meeting with James Harrington the next morning revealed that Edmund O'Malley, a successful merchant who had never married or had children of his own, had left Quentin a substantial sum of money and a small shipping business in Philadelphia. The business is well established and has competent managers already in place, Harrington explained. You could continue to run it from a distance if you wished, visiting occasionally to oversee operations. Or you could sell it, of course. There would be no shortage of interested buyers. Quentin glanced at Lucille, who had joined them for the meeting. What would you advise, Mr. Harrington, as someone familiar with the business? The lawyer considered. The shipping company is profitable and well run. If I were in your position, Mr. O'Malley, I would maintain ownership and allow the current managers to continue their work, with regular correspondence and occasional visits to ensure everything remains in order. Quentin nodded thoughtfully. And the paperwork? Must I travel to Philadelphia immediately? Not immediately, no. I can leave the preliminary documents with you today. You'll need to have your signature witnessed by a local judge or notary. The final transfer of assets would require your presence in Philadelphia eventually, but there's no pressing deadline. After Harrington departed, Lucille and Quentin sat in the quiet store, contemplating this unexpected turn of events. A shipping company, Lucille mused. That could be useful for a general store, couldn't it? Better rates on imports, perhaps? Quentin smiled at her practical approach. It could indeed. And the capital could be invested here, expanding the store, perhaps adding a warehouse to serve some of the smaller settlements nearby. The possibilities expanded before them, a future neither could have imagined a day earlier, but Lucille still felt a lingering concern. You will need to go to Philadelphia eventually, she said quietly. Yes, he agreed, but not alone if you're willing to come with me. He took her hand. In fact, I was thinking it might make a fine honeymoon destination. The idea of traveling so far was both thrilling and terrifying to Lucille, who had never ventured beyond the borders of Texas. But the thought of doing so as Quentin's wife made it seem like an adventure rather than a risk. When? She asked, the single word encompassing multiple questions. Christmas is in 3 weeks, he said. Too soon for proper preparations, I imagine, but perhaps January, unless you'd prefer a longer engagement, Lucille thought about it. A longer engagement was certainly the conventional choice, the proper thing to do, but they were both adults, sure of their feelings, with no reason to wait beyond social expectations. January, she decided, the first week of the new year. His face lit up with joy. January it is. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation, not for the wedding, which they had decided would be a small, simple affair, but for the Christmas season, always the busiest time at the general store. Lucille and Quentin worked longer hours than usual, stocking special holiday items, fulfilling orders for families preparing holiday feasts, and helping customers select gifts for loved ones. Despite the exhaustion, Lucille found herself happier than she could remember being in years. The store that had once felt like a burden of responsibility now hummed with possibility. Quentin's presence beside her, his quiet strength and unfailing support, made even the most challenging days manageable. On Christmas Eve, after closing the store early, they walked together to the cemetery. It was Lucille's first visit to her father's grave since the day she had met Quentin, and she felt a complex mixture of emotions as they approached the simple headstone. I wish he could have met you, she said, as they stood side by side in the fading light. He would have liked you, I think. I wish that too, Quentin replied, his arm around her shoulders providing warmth against the December chill. From everything you've told me about him, he was a man I would have respected greatly. Lucille knelt to place a small wreath on the grave. I miss him every day. But the pain isn't as sharp now. It's more like an ache, a space that will always be there but doesn't consume me anymore. That's how it should be, Quentin said gently. The people we lose stay with us, but they wouldn't want their absence to prevent us from finding joy. Like you said that first day, she remembered. He'd want you to keep living. I believed it then, Quentin said, and I believe it even more now. Lucille rose, taking one last look at her father's grave. Merry Christmas, Pa, she whispered. Then, turning to Quentin, she said more firmly, Let's go home. Christmas Day brought a rare snow to Brownsville, transforming the dusty streets into a brief winter wonderland. Lucille and Quentin spent the morning at her house, exchanging simple gifts before joining friends for Christmas dinner at the Taylor home. Thomas now recovered from his injury and eager to host the man who had saved his arm. The week between Christmas and New Year's was filled with wedding preparations. Word spread quickly through town, and despite their wishes for simplicity, it seemed all of Brownsville was determined to participate in the celebration. Mrs. Patterson organized a group of ladies to decorate the church. Thomas Taylor insisted on providing the finest lumber for a wedding arch, and the hotel owner offered his finest suite for the wedding night at no charge. January 5, 1877 dawned clear and cold. Lucille stood in her bedroom, examining her reflection in the mirror. Her wedding dress was new but not elaborate, a cream-colored gown with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, complemented by a simple veil anchored with her mother's pearl combs. She looked different somehow, her features the same but illuminated from within by a happiness she couldn't conceal. A knock at the door revealed Martha Taylor, who had come to help her prepare. "Oh, Lucille," Martha breathed, "you look beautiful. Your father would be so proud." Lucille felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "Thank you, Martha, for everything you've done to help with the wedding. It's the least we could do after what Quentin did for Thomas." Martha adjusted the veil carefully. "That man loves you something fierce, you know. I see it every time he looks at you." "I love him too," Lucille said, the simple statement inadequate to express the depth of her feelings. "I never expected this to find love again after losing Pa. It feels like a miracle sometimes." Martha squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what it is, dear. A miracle. Now, are you ready to go meet your groom?" The church was filled to capacity when Lucille arrived. It seemed the entire population of Brownsville had turned out to witness the wedding of Matthew Bryson's daughter to the man who had appeared so mysteriously in their town less than 6 months earlier. Thomas Taylor, still moving carefully but insistent on the honor, escorted Lucille down the aisle in her father's place. At the altar, Quentin waited, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. He looked handsome in his new suit, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration that made Lucille's heart swell. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership exchanged with absolute certainty. "I, Quentin, take you, Lucille, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Lucille repeated the words, she felt their weight and truth in every fiber of her being. This was right. This was where she was meant to be, as the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Quentin leaned down to seal their union with a kiss. Lucille felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with tears at her father's grave had led her to this moment of profound joy. She had kept living, just as Quentin had urged her to do on that fateful day, and in doing so had found a love she hadn't known was possible. The reception at the town hall was a joyous affair, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. Lucille and Quentin moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separated throughout the evening. As the celebration continued around them, Quentin led Lucille outside for a moment of quiet beneath the January stars. "Happy, Mrs. O'Malley?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," she answered truthfully. "And you, Mr. O'Malley?" "I found everything I never knew I was searching for," he said, his eyes reflecting the starlight above. "A home, a purpose, and a love beyond anything I deserved. You deserve every happiness, Quentin," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." "As I will for you," he promised, sealing the words with a kiss that held the promise of all their tomorrows. 2 weeks later, Lucille and Quentin boarded a train headed east, the first leg of their journey to Philadelphia. Lucille had never traveled by rail before, and the excitement of the new experience helped offset her nerves about leaving Brownsville for the first time in her life. The store had been left in the capable hands of Samuel Wilson, a local man who had worked for Matthew Bryson years earlier, and had agreed to manage things during their absence. They planned to be away for a month, time enough to handle the legalities of Quentin's inheritance, see some of the sights of the East, and return home to begin their life together in earnest. Philadelphia in winter was a revelation to Lucille. The grand buildings, the bustling streets, the sheer number of people, all so different from the small Texas town she had known all her life. With Quentin as her guide, Having spent time in the city during his college years, she gradually overcame her initial overwhelm and began to enjoy the experience. The business meetings went smoothly. The shipping company Quentin had inherited was indeed well run, with a loyal staff who had respected his uncle and welcomed him as the new owner. After reviewing the operations and meeting with the managers, Quentin and Lucille decided to maintain ownership, with quarterly reports to be sent to Brownsville and annual visits to Philadelphia when possible. With the business matters settled, they spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the city and surrounding areas. They attended the theater, dined in restaurants finer than any Lucille had ever seen, and visited museums and historical sites. At Quentin's suggestion, they took a day trip to see his childhood home near Harrisburg, a small farm now owned by another family but still holding precious memories for him. Throughout their travels, Lucille kept a detailed journal, determined to remember every moment of this adventure to share with their children someday. For they had decided, in quiet conversations during the journey, that they wanted a family not immediately, but within a year or two, once they had established their joint business ventures in Brownsville. The return journey westward felt different from their outbound trip. Lucille found herself eager to return to Brownsville, to the store, to the life they were building together. Philadelphia had been exciting and educational, but it wasn't home. Home was the small Texas town where she had grieved and healed, where she had fallen in love, where her future waited to unfold. They arrived back in Brownsville on a crisp February afternoon to find the town much as they had left it, though perhaps a bit more welcoming to their return than either had expected. A small crowd had gathered at the station to greet them, Martha and Thomas Taylor at the forefront with Mrs. Patterson close behind, eager for news and stories from their journey. That evening, after unpacking and settling back into Lucille's house, now their house, they walked to the store to check on things. Samuel had done an admirable job in their absence, maintaining inventory and even making a few improvements to the display arrangements. As they stood in the quiet store after Samuel departed, Quentin pulled Lucille into his arms. "So, Mrs. O'Malley, what's next for us?" She smiled up at him, thinking of all the possibilities that lay before them. "Everything, Mr. O'Malley, everything." Spring arrived in Texas with a burst of wildflowers and new possibilities. Quentin and Lucille put the inheritance to good use, expanding the store to include a warehouse that could supply smaller settlements in the surrounding areas. They hired 2 additional staff members, freeing Lucille to focus on accounting and correspondence while Quentin handled purchasing and deliveries. Business thrived under their joint management, their complementary skills creating a stronger operation than either could have built alone. The shipping connection in Philadelphia proved valuable, allowing them to import goods from the East Coast and Europe at better rates than their competitors. In April, they began construction on a new home on a piece of land at the edge of town larger than Lucille's small house, but not ostentatious, designed with both comfort and future family expansion in mind. Quentin worked alongside the builders whenever he could spare time from the store, his carpentry skills inherited from his father proving useful in creating custom details throughout the house. By August, as they prepared to move into their new home, Lucille had news that added to their happiness. She was expecting their first child, due to arrive in early spring of the following year. Quentin's reaction to the announcement was everything Lucille could have hoped for. His face transformed with joy, his eyes filling with tears as he gathered her in his arms, whispering words of love and gratitude against her hair. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Beyond words," he assured her. "I never imagined I could be this fortunate, Lucille." A home, a thriving business, a child on the way, and you, the center of it all. As her pregnancy progressed and their business continued to flourish, Lucille often thought back to that day at her father's grave, to the grief that had seemed insurmountable then. If someone had told her in that moment of despair that less than 2 years later she would be happily married, expecting a child and partner in a growing business enterprise, she would have thought them cruel or mad. Yet here she was, living a life fuller and richer than she had ever imagined possible. On March 12, 1878, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Lucille gave birth to a healthy son, whom they named Matthew Quentin O'Malley in honor of both their fathers. As she held her newborn son in her arms with Quentin beside her, his face alight with wonder and love, Lucille felt a circle completing itself, the cycle of loss and renewal, grief and joy, ending and beginning. "He's perfect," Quentin whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "Just like his mother, he has your chin," Lucille observed, studying the tiny face with fascination, "and I think he'll have your eyes." "Poor child," Quentin joked, though his voice was thick with emotion. "Let's hope he gets your good sense to balance out my stubborn streak." As little Matthew grew, so did their family business. The O'Malley General Store and Supply Company became a fixture in Brownsville and the surrounding region, known for fair prices, quality merchandise, and the integrity of its owners. 2 years after Matthew's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Eleanor Martha, named for Quentin's mother and their dear friend Martha Taylor. The family was complete, their home filled with laughter, occasional tears, and the constant bustle of active children. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that affected the local economy, illnesses that frightened them, and the normal challenges of balancing business and family responsibilities. But through it all, Quentin and Lucille faced each day as they had promised in their wedding vows together, partners in all things. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Quentin surprised Lucille with a visit to the cemetery. It was a clear January day, cold but bright, as they stood together at Matthew Bryson's grave, their children respectfully quiet beside them. "I wanted to thank him," Quentin explained as they placed flowers on the well-maintained grave, "for raising the woman who changed my life, and to show him his grandchildren, even if only in spirit." Lucille leaned into her husband's side, watching as 4-year-old Matthew carefully placed a small stone on top of his grandfather's headstone, mimicking the gesture he'd seen his father make. "He'd be so proud," she said softly. "Of all of us, he'd be proud of you," Quentin corrected gently. "For keeping living, even when it seemed impossible. For building this life, this family." "We built it together," Lucille reminded him. Looking up into the face she had come to know as well as her own, the laugh lines around his eyes deeper now. A touch of silver at his temples, but still the same man who had found her in her moment of deepest despair and offered hope. As they walked back toward town, their children running ahead on the path, Lucille reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from loneliness to a family overflowing with love, from uncertainty to purpose, it had all begun with a stranger's voice at her father's grave, offering words she hadn't been ready to hear but had needed desperately. "He'd want you to keep living." And she had. They had. Together, they had created a life neither could have imagined alone, a testament to the healing power of love and the infinite possibilities that open up when one finds the courage to embrace them. As Quentin took her hand, his touch as familiar and comforting as ever, Lucille smiled up at him with a heart full of gratitude for the unexpected twist of fate that had brought this wandering cowboy to her side when she needed him most, and for all the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary days they had shared since. "I love you, Quentin O'Malley," she said simply. "And I love you, Lucille O'Malley," he replied, his voice carrying the same certainty it had on the day they wed. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Hand in hand, they continued down the path toward home, toward the future they had built together, a future that had begun with tears, but had blossomed into a life filled with more joy than either had dared to dream possible.